but just want to make sure everyone is aware of that. My name is Jean, and I'm the social media marketing manager for Blue Stoop. We are a Philly-based community literary center. We offer writing classes and then these fun events to help you stay connected with Philly's writing community.
Awesome. Thank you for hosting us today, Jean, and big thanks to Blue Stoop friends. My name is Alex Hillman. If you've seen my name around the Philadelphia area, it's probably more attached to a co-working community that I started a million years ago called Indy Hall. And when Blue Stoop started forming, when I first heard about it, so much about this community and its goals felt really resonant and familiar, both in terms of working together with a community to create place and create safety and support for people in an industry who are often working in isolation or who have limited resources to do the things that are most important to them. So I'm a big fan of the Blue Stoop community. I'm happy to support anytime, any way that I can. So spending a little bit of time with all of you this afternoon was an easy yes, something I've been looking forward to for a while. Because in addition to running that co-working space, I've got a couple of other businesses and projects that I'm involved in, one of which includes having published a book last year. And so when Emma put out the call for, new folks to run an evening on the stoop, I said, I wrote this book. It's sold several thousand copies, and I did it all without a publisher or without having boxes of books in my basement and having to take trips to USPS. Do you think people would find that useful? And she said, I think so. So that's why we're here. I'm going to share my screen just so I can pull up some references for some of the tools and websites and resources that I'm going to be talking about. You can see what those look like up on the screen. So I already mentioned, Indy Hall is a co-working space, but also a community of people who, even before the pandemic, didn't have a place where they went to work. Some people had an office that they would go to and they would work from home sometimes. Some people had an office and they just wanted other people to be around. And so Indy Hall is sort of like a club and a clubhouse for independents, remote workers, entrepreneurs, and people who sort of are choosing a different path in their work and life, maybe adjacent to a more mainstream path, or maybe an entirely different one because the paths that many people follow are not for them. So I just wanted to mention that, again, a common-hearted community to the Blue Stoop community. In parallel to Indy Hall, for almost as long, I've been running a business called Stacking the Bricks with my business partner, Amy Hoy. And both of us come not from a business background specifically, more from creative backgrounds. So Amy's background is in design, mine is in technology, and respectively built separate businesses. We left full-time jobs to freelance, went from freelancing to consulting, and eventually into products and businesses that were sort of separating our work and our income from the time, and through products, and in her case, software, in my case, Indy Hall. And we realized that lots of the creative people that we are friends with, that when we meet out and about, they have these, creative skills that they deploy in their industry, whatever it may be. But for some reason, there were blind spots about how to go about the business side of things. If you've got the skills to make something, the most common truth is that the person who has the skills to make something and loves making things often lacks the skills to sell those things. And so you end up relying on other people, other platforms. In the case of, the book world, in the literary world, that could be a publisher or something along those lines. And so Amy and I are kind of all about helping people who have the creative skills be self-sufficient. And not that you have to do everything yourself. We're going to show you how that is not the case. So I kind of want to dispel the idea that self-publishing means you do everything yourself. And it's all about sort of finding great tools, great platforms, great partners, and learning from people, myself included, but lots of other people. I didn't figure all of this out on my own. I'd never published a book before. How do you go from having an idea for a thing to actually having it in the world with paying customers? So my game plan for today is I want to go through sort of three sort of cornerstones that I learned while launching and selling the book, which, I said Stacking the Bricks is sort of our main site, which is articles and podcasts and videos and all kinds of things. The book itself is the Tiny MBA. This is the book that I published last year. since it came out in August, has sold around 4,000 copies, has been profitable both in print and digital format, and again, all without a publisher, and without reliance on big platforms like Amazon. That's a really important key. I want to talk more about that. So the sort of three pillars I want to talk about are the importance of knowing your audience, the importance and value of owning your distribution, and then how we actually did that. And then what I call shopping the shelf, which is what tools and platforms are out there to help you do things that might seem really scary and complicated, especially if you have limited or no technical skills, to do things that are super, super powerful without ever writing a line of code. And I'm going to show you some of the things that we're using off the shelf that are low cost, high impact, and let you kind of like own the entire process. And maybe most importantly, I want to leave as much time as possible for Q&A at the end. So I'm going to kind of zip through some parts of this, but what I want to make sure is that there's time for you to ask questions, either in reaction to or about anything that I talk about, but also if you came here wanting to know something that I didn't cover. I'm happy to share anything that I know or have learned. I'm also the kind of person who's happy to stay in my lane and say, I don't know the answer to that. But if there's someone that I've learned from that maybe has a valuable answer, I can point in that direction. Sound like a good plan? Cool. So here's where I want to start. When I set out to create this book, one of the very first things whenever I talk to somebody who wants to create anything, a book or otherwise, the first question, or they're usually like, I want to write a book about X, right? In this case, I want to write a book about business, or the idea, in this case, it wasn't just about business, but it was specifically about this idea of the long game of business, thinking, long-term thinking, sort of the antidote to, hyper growth, venture capital, be the next Facebook. This is more like to the ground, think about business for the long term. Think of your customers as people instead of numbers on a balance sheet, all those kinds of things. But when I think about who this book is for, right? Lots of people can read this book. Lots of people have read this book, including people who you might imagine have very different goals and worldviews and needs and desires. But when I set out to write the book, I knew clearly in my head who I was writing for, and that was primarily the people that we create all of our things for at Stacking the Bricks, which is, as I said, people with creative skills who maybe are curious about business, but are also intimidated by business. And so one of the measures for me when I'm starting on any sort of creative project that I intend to put out into the world and sell is I want to have as clear of a picture in my head of who is going to buy this. Who is this for? And that's sometimes an easy answer. You've got a pretty clear idea in your head. And sometimes people really struggle with that. And, the sort of measure in my mind is always, if I could be in a crowded room, obviously that wouldn't make sense in 2020 or 2021, but imagine a crowded room full of people with lots of interests. What could I say out loud over a loudspeaker that would get my intended audience's attention, right? And at one end of the spectrum, shouting, Michael or Susan is going to get all the Michaels or all the Susans to turn around and see who's talking. But you can zoom out a layer from that and say freelancers or romance novel lovers or whatever it is. And like the more there's a level of specificity. This is the hardest part about this is there's not a single level of specificity that is correct. But if you could imagine saying it in a few words and getting people's attention because you called out a name that they connect with, you've got a pretty good idea of who this book is for. So the importance of knowing who the book is for isn't just an abstract exercise. The reason it's so important is because before I ever wrote a single page of the book, I also knew where that audience existed online. And this is where I think people often want to get into the creative work of I want to write the book and then let it be somebody else's problem to sell it, or I'll put it on Amazon and list it in a category and hope that it gets picked up or discovered, whatever it might be. I think that when you make that choice, you sort of turn over all of the chance to fate and don't take any chance into your own hands, into the things that you actually control. So what I'm trying to think about who a book is for, it's also so I can say, well, where are the places where those communities gather online, Where are there Facebook groups? Are there forums? Are there places, subreddits are very popular. Are there places where comments are happening on social media, people not just people posting about their own work, but people who are interested in a topic and actively seeking each other out, having conversations, recommending things to each other. Where do people go for book recommendations? Like your book is a really great way to reverse engineer where the people who might want to buy your book go. So in my case, there's a handful of websites that I knew that people who are the creative people that are curious about business go, which means that early on, I could spend some of my time when I'm not writing the book or not working on the design, not working on anything else, hanging out there and interacting in those conversations. And if there's other people that are sharing recommendations, I can engage with that. Or if people are asking for recommendations, I can share recommendations that aren't my own work. And this is truly, when I think of marketing, this is the earliest stage of marketing, and it's the stuff that people I think often skip over, because when they think marketing, they think I have to get out there and promote my book once it's ready. And this is done months before the book is even being sent to the printer, being sent to the publisher. I'm in those communities building rapport, earning trust, and effectively social capital. The way I think about this as a metaphor in my mind is it's kind of like loading up a spring or a slingshot, where if you take the slingshot and you put your little pebble in the slingshot, but you never pull it back, the pebble just kind of falls out of the slingshot. But if you put the pebble in the slingshot and you pull it back, each time you pull it back is kind of like what happens each time you build trust, or each time you're in that community interacting, supporting, contributing, pulls back the slingshot a little bit more. And then when you release it, and it being your book, you've got all that built up momentum, and more importantly, all that built up trust with people who are like, wow, every time you interacted, you were really helpful, we really like you, we're excited to see your work. And it's not just we like you and want to support you, it's we believe that you have helped us, you've given us something useful before, which means this new work that's coming out is probably going to be valuable just the same. So knowing your audience by name, figuring out where you can reach them, and then going to those places where they talk about those themes, talk about those topics, make recommendations, and being a part of that community long before there's ever a book to even tease, right? I think that's a critical step that I've been doing for way longer than I even knew I was going to write the book. But even, early 2020, when we started taking this project seriously and saying, I think sometime this year, this book is going to be able to be published, I was in those communities specifically with the thought in mind of these are the places where, as I get closer to launch, I'll be able to share screenshots, share excerpts. This is the places where the podcasts that I want to be a guest on to promote the book already get listened to and shared, and those kinds of things. So it's early stage investment in research and participation kind of builds up a lot of that momentum and helps you really understand your audience. The other benefit here is your book is better because you have a clearer picture of who you're writing for. It is so hard to write for nobody, right? And with many creative works, we're writing for ourselves first. And I think that is totally fine. But if you want somebody else to read the book or buy the book, it does need to be for them as well. And the less in time you spend interacting with those people, the less of or the fuzzier of a picture you have of them, the harder it is to write for them. If a book is for everybody, it's hard to write a good book that is for everybody. So, in a lot of creative industries, people tell you to niche down, and I'm not super into that language, but I think that the lesson inside of it is the value in focusing allows you to resonate way, way better with that specific audience. But remember, I mentioned before, beyond my very specific audience, which was creative people who are curious about business, this book has also been read by people who have actual MBAs, people who have raised tens of millions of dollars in venture capital, which is something I specifically warn against in this book, read this book and loved it, right? So writing for a focused audience doesn't make the book not valuable for the others, but it makes it extremely valuable for the core, and then also valuable for people sort of in the concentric circles outside of that. I want to move on to distribution because I've kind of hinted at it a couple of times. And one of the things I have some friends that work in publishing, a couple of friends who are agents, and a conversation that a couple of friends and I have had a bunch of times is it true that I need 10,000 Twitter followers before I can get a book deal? And I would convert that question into self-publishing. People say, "Well, nobody knows who I am on social media. I don't have, I have a couple hundred followers on Instagram, maybe, or on Twitter. But is that enough? Can I launch to them?" And the truth is that while I do have a good number of followers on Twitter in particular, Instagram a lot less for me. I've been on active. Twitter is one of those watering holes where my audience is. Um, However, social media over my career of shipping products digital and now this physical book, social media is not very good at selling things. Social media is good for listening and trying to reach and understand an audience, but in terms of like posting a link to get people to buy your book is a lot harder than people really think it is. And I think when publishers, for instance, want you to have a certain size Twitter following, some do, some don't. From my understanding, is the better ones typically don't, because they know that social media doesn't actually sell books. What they see that as is a positive signal that you're engaged in your community, right? So it's not that you need Twitter followers. The Twitter followers are kind of a trailing indicator. They're a clue that you're probably already active in your community. But there's other things that it could be. It's like, do you do any lectures or public speaking in the circuit related to your audience? Do you blog or write or do guest columns? Like, or do you already interact with your audience is way more important. Far more valuable than any number of Twitter or Instagram followers, though, is having an email list. And if you've gotten even brushed up against any sort of internet marketing, online sales, you may have heard the idea of like, the most valuable thing you can have is your email list. And if you haven't heard that before, then I'm glad to be the first person to tell you it, because it's true. It's one of those things that you hear it so often, it almost feels like it can't be real because it's such a trope. But the fact of the matter is an email list is super powerful. In the context of versus social media, a lot of that is because you own the direct relationship with the person on the other side. With social media, that platform could go away, that platform could change the algorithm, and you're always kind of fighting for attention because the algorithm wants to direct it the way it wants to direct it. And it also wants to optimize it so that if it thinks that it could get money out of you in order to get in front of somebody, that they will squeeze those dollars. Whereas once you and I are able to email each other, then, well, we're in control of that relationship. And I think one of the keys is to remember that an email address on an email list is not a thing to sell to or sell at. I think that's a very common mistake. People look at an email list and go, if I'm building an email list, these are my customers or my future customers. That's not entirely true. More importantly, I think it's damaging to the outlook, which in my opinion is an email list is an opportunity to build ongoing relationships, right? Someone who's on my email list is there because I gave them something useful once and they're interested in more, which means I'm going to send them more useful things long before I ever ask for something. And so in some cases that is, teasing, it's sometimes like maybe like related articles or references, or if I'm doing research, maybe I'll share some of that primary research early on to attract more of the people that are really interested in the subject matter of my book or my project, whatever it is. Sometimes it's, they know who you are, they're interested in the topic, and it could be as simple as offering, future updates and a launch discount, get 10% off on, launch week or whatever it is. The email list, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can actually start and grow that in the simplest way possible. If you don't already have some kind of email list that you can use to turn a first contact with a potential reader into a long-term relationship where they can read more of your stuff, where you can earn their trust and make it so that when the book comes out, they're like, well, everything else you've sent me is great. I'm so excited that the book is out, and the odds of them being a buyer is very high. That's the relationship that you want to cultivate. I actually, and with the Tiny MBA, I started with a rather large email list actually that we didn't use at launch. Stacking the Bricks has has for all of our other products a list that's, we've got like 10,000 some odd people, almost 11,000 people on that list, I think. But because this was a new product and I wanted to get it in the hands of people that I could feel comfortable promoting it more widely. I've got a successful book, but don't let it fool you that I wasn't nervous as hell to put it out in the world and, have people buy it and then tell me, oh, it's terrible. I hate it. This is stupid. All those things went through my head as well. So I kind of wanted I wanted momentum, but I wanted it to be a little smaller than I knew we had the ability to reach. So what I actually did was, rather than setting up, a MailChimp or a ConvertKit or a Tiny Letter, we'll talk more about those tools in a minute. I set up a thing on a couple of those watering holes that I mentioned earlier. I made a post where I said, hey, that book that I've been mentioning for the last couple of months, it's coming out in a couple of weeks, and I'm really excited. We're going to do pre-orders, and what I'd love to do is, if you're interested in being on the pre-order list, send me an email. And I set up a special email address. It was just alex@tiny.mba, which was a separate email from my main email address. I said, just send me an email here and tell me that you want to be on the pre-order list. That's it. No fancy web page, no email opt-in, no fancy technology, just an email address. And what was really cool about this was, because it was almost a little more friction for some people than, just typing an email address and pressing send, because they had to open up their email client, type it in, think of a subject, write the email, all those kinds of things. The people who joined were the people that were most enthusiastic. And I knew that those are the people who I'm going to get some of the best feedback from. The other thing that I didn't know to expect, but was really amazing, is a lot of them wrote something in the message. It wasn't just, I want to know when the book is available. They'd ask a question or tell me how much the work that I've shared up until that point got them excited for the book, or maybe they'd ask a question, whatever it was. But it opened up an opportunity for an interaction, rather than that very transactional feeling of collecting email addresses, which, while I have a very successful business built on top of that modality, it was really, really powerful for launching a brand new product to do that. And over the course of about a week, I got about 300 people. It was like 330 people to email into that address and say they wanted to be on the launch list. And what I realized at that point was, my initial plan was to take all of those people and put them into my newsletter software and then send out a blast to all of them. And what I realized when it was launch day, I said, I have something even better than that, which is I have the ability to reply to the initial email that they sent me, which means they're going to get a reply, which is going to basically guarantee, skipping spam filters and things like that. It's going to show up in their inbox with the subject that they sent me an email from. And it's clearly going to be from a person and not a robot, right? And again, if my goal is to build trust to earn a sale, that's a really powerful message to be sending. So I did them in batches of about 100, where I had written out an email in a notepad that said, here are, hey, the book is available now. Here's how you can help. You can buy a copy of the book. You can buy multiple copies of the book and give them as gifts. And you can share this on social media, right? You can do one or all of them, whichever ones you want. If you don't want to buy the book, but you do want to share it, that's in some ways just as helpful. And I copied pasted the bulk of that email. And if it was an email address of somebody that I recognized, whether it was from the participation in those communities or somebody from my past, coworkers or classmates or whatever it might be, I would have a little one-liner at the beginning that would just acknowledge who they were and make it feel like this was a personal email, because truthfully it was, even if after that opening email, the rest of it was a copy paste. And the most incredible thing, I've launched tons of products in the last 15 years. And I've done the thing where I anxiously type out the launch email, I press send, and then I wait for the first sale. And in those 60 seconds, minute, 10 minutes, hour, it's like the best, worst tension ever. Because you're worried, like, what if all this work was for nothing? And then one sale comes in, you're like, I hope it's going to be more than one sale. So that time can be so stressful. As I was sending these emails in batches of 100 over the course of a few days, I was seeing people go from receiving that email to actually buying the book or sharing it on social media in less than 90 seconds. It was not just the highest conversion rate in terms of, and we it's tough to tell because some people were buying on Amazon or we don't have any visibility into who is buying, but I can estimate like between 50 and 60% of the people, so 160, 170 of the 330 people who said, I want to buy, bought, and they bought within 60 seconds of getting that email, which, again, in my experience is unheard of. But the amazing thing was they didn't just buy, but they shared. And those 330 purchases turned into over 1,000 sales in just a couple of days. And so when I use that slingshot metaphor, all of this front-loaded work, and if it sounds like a lot of work, it absolutely was, but it was strategic, it was systematized wherever possible, while still keeping that human touch. I pulled that slingshot all the way back, and then this thing was off to the races. It was truly incredible. Once we got past that initial launch momentum, then I took it to my main mailing list. We were able to multiply that momentum and say, hey, in pre-sales, we've already sold 1,000 copies. And now we're telling you about it. And then that doubled in another couple of days, and then so on and so forth. And then I was able to figure out the rest of my enduring marketing strategy post-launch, which we could spend an entire other hour on what we've done to launch to sell after launch. The last thing that I want to do before opening up to questions, because I want to give you time for those, is to share some of the tools that we've used along the way, including a couple that I find a lot of people aren't aware of, and I think have the potential to be a very big impact on anybody's ability to self-publish a book and be in control of the process. So the first is a tool that I've mentioned a couple of times, which is ConvertKit. With a bit of disclosure, the CEO and founder of ConvertKit is a friend of mine, but this is also a tool that I did not use it when he launched it, and it has gotten so good. And more importantly, he, as a business owner, I think is extremely ethical. And among the many, many tools you can use to send emails, ConvertKit is one that really centers itself on the things we've been talking about. And it says it right here on the homepage: find your audience, turn them into fans, and make a living as a creator. They're extremely creator centric, and they make business decisions and product decisions to support people with creative skills, which I think is it's important to pick tools that are built by people who actually care about you and your success. So I'm a huge fan of ConvertKit, and in the last year, they have actually added a extremely generous free account. It's free up to your first 1,000 subscribers. And remember, I launched with just a few hundred subscribers. And so this is if you don't have any sort of email list, this is a really, really great place to get started. And in addition to great software, with also like well-priced options once you start out growing that free plan, tons of great educational resources and things like that, ConvertKit is a great destination for educating yourself on the broader bits of email especially, but generally marketing things as a creator. The other tool, and this, I want to say the other tool, I say the biggest tool that self-publishing a physical book in 2020 or 2021 would not have been possible without is Lulu. I don't know if anybody's heard of Lulu, if this is familiar platform in your circles, but I find that most people aren't familiar with it, even if they've interacted with it, kind of behind the scenes. I started looking for, the terminology is print on demand, right? I knew what I didn't want. Not even because of cost. What I didn't want was to go buy 2,000 copies of a book, sell the first however many, and then have the rest sitting in my basement collecting dust. And then every week I'd have to take a box of them, package them up, take them to USPS, and handle all of that. Never mind the complexity of shipping, international. I have too many other things going on. I don't want that problem. And I started getting curious, like, are there ways to do that on demand? Now, the most popular way to do this on demand is Amazon. And I'm not going to spend time today talking about why we're no longer on Amazon, except I will share the one critical piece that I think most authors do not realize when they're putting their books on Amazon, is that when you sell your books on Amazon, you're not actually selling your book on Amazon. You are putting your book on Amazon and earning royalties. And that nuance is really, really important and different, because especially if you're somebody who has any intention of publishing more than one book, if you don't own the relationship between the reader when they buy and you don't have any way to let them know, hey, I have a new book out, right? So the value of a reader isn't just them buying one book, is to buy the next book, or to let them know, hey, we're running a promotion. If you love the book, tell your friends, all those kinds of things. Amazon does, on purpose, gives you no tools to reach the existing readers. They own that customer and they protect that customer. And in some cases, that's part of the value that Amazon actually offers. But I knew for us, we wanted to own the relationship with the customer. The book wasn't just the book, it was a piece of a bigger business, but also we wanted to be able to own customer support. So if there's a problem with the book, if the book arrives damaged or there's some other issue, I want to know that because I want to be able to use that to make the book better. When somebody buys the book, if there's a problem with the book, they're unsatisfied, it's not what they thought it was, that ends up in a review rather than an email to me saying, hey, this happened, and giving me the chance to do something about it. As a creative person who's also a business owner, that was really important to me, which ruled Amazon out as an option from the start. So I was looking for alternatives to Amazon's print on demand and found Lulu. Lulu.com is sort of a all-in-one shop of that print on demand service that I mentioned, but also everything, including you can hire a cover designer on Lulu, you can hire an editor on Lulu, you can hire somebody to do your book layout. So like all of the other creative skills that you need that maybe you don't have, right? So I wrote a book, but I'm not a designer. Don't do, typesetting and layout, all of these other things. I went and found a freelancer on my own, but I could have gone to Lulu and worked with their services to find the contractors, the freelancers who can do those things. And the funny thing that I learned after the fact is almost everyone you can hire as a freelancer are the same people that you would be able to get through a traditional book deal. A lot of these people work for big publishers, except in this case, the publisher is not taking a giant cut. You have to pay a little bit up front, right? You're making that investment up front instead of the publisher, but you own all of the outcomes rather than hoping to earn out a royalty. So it's a different financial transaction, but in terms of the quality of the people that you have access to, they're just as good, in some cases, literally the same people, and in some cases even better, right? Because these are people that specialize in independent publishing rather than some of the sort of dead and dying tropes of the traditional publisher world. So Lulu's got sort of a full suite of services that you can pick and choose from. They also have services where you can submit your book and they'll help you get your book added to Amazon, get your book added to, they'll get you the ISBN, they'll get you the added to the bookstore databases, all those kinds of things. Everything you want, you pay a little extra for, and the difference again, you're paying up front rather than paying for it later out of royalties. But you can do all of that through Lulu. But I only use Lulu for one thing, and that's the actual print on demand service. And this is, for me, the absolute magic. Lulu has this separate service that is called Lulu Express that is essentially an invisible to your end customers service that when somebody buys a book on your store, you charge the customer's credit card, and then you send that order automatically over to Lulu. Lulu takes that order with the digital files of your cover and the contents of your book. They send it to a printing facility that is regionally located near the end customer, which means if they are somewhere overseas, that book is not going to be printed in Florida and then shipped to Israel. It's going to be printed in Portugal and shipped to Israel, which means your shipping costs are reduced, meaning you can offer very affordable shipping to your customers. Carbon footprint is also significantly less, which I think is a massive, massive access to infrastructure. And best of all, like, this doesn't cost anything out of pocket. The only thing you pay for is every time a book is ordered, you pay Lulu for that order, and you keep the difference between whatever you charged your customer. So for instance, my book, The Tiny MBA, which I've got a stack of copies over here that I did order, this costs about $4.50 to print. And that's minus shipping. So for us, shipping averages between $4 and $8, but I can ship a book anywhere in the world for $8, which means I can have a book printed and shipped anywhere in the world for about $12 to $14, meaning I'm making $6 to $9 per book. But I don't have to worry about, again, inventory in my basement and all of those kinds of things. The other thing I'll say about Lulu, besides having really, like, the print quality is phenomenal. One of my biggest problems with print on demand service in general, if you've ever done like print on demand t-shirts, often the quality is clearly less than going to a screen printer. The print quality on Lulu is very, very good. I would argue indistinguishable. A book expert might tell me otherwise, but for the average buyer, this is a very high quality cover to pages. You can do full color, you can do glossy, matte, like a lot of control, a lot of options. Super impressed with the print quality. And I'll also say, maybe most importantly to me, especially by comparison to the terrible seller customer experience that I've had with Amazon, Lulu's customer service is absolutely phenomenal. We've not been without challenges and mistakes and trouble, but Lulu's customer service has been really, really responsive all the way through, including when a book inevitably goes missing because things get lost in the mail. I have an account rep that I can email and say, hey, this customer's book is missing, and they ship a replacement at no cost to me or the customer. Which, again, if I was doing all of this myself, I would have to factor that in. So I find all of that tremendous, super incredible, and the kinds of things, different book sizes and formats that you can print. Lots of different books. You can do comic books, magazines. They even do calendars and things like that. I can't say enough good things about Lulu Express. Keith had a good question about BookBaby versus Lulu. I don't have personal experience with BookBaby, although when I was doing my research, there was a bunch of side-by-side comparisons. There were a couple of reasons that I picked Lulu. If I'm remembering correctly, in the other people who tried both and actually did like a side-by-side, Lulu's print quality was better. Their print turnaround was not only better, it was more consistent. People found that the quality and turnaround time with BookBaby was pretty erratic. It was also, if I'm remembering right, BookBaby was also like more expensive, maybe not in the core book itself, but shipping. But I will say that it's worth doing your own research. Sometimes the numbers change and things like that. If you search out BookBaby versus Lulu, read the reviews. I read a bunch of them myself, and Lulu came out as the clear choice for me. BookBaby, Lulu, there was like a third option. I can't remember what it was, but they were the three that were consistently compared with each other, and Lulu was the final choice for me. Part of that was also that I mentioned is Lulu is good, kind of invisible under the hood. Your customer is never going to see that Lulu is behind all of this, which may have you wondering, well, how do I actually sell the darn book, right? So if we go back to Tiny MBA, if you scroll down on the website here, there is an actual checkout section where you can pick the paperback or just the ebook, and then there's a cart and a cart experience and all of those kinds of things. This is on our own website. We already had our own website, and so if you have a WordPress site or something like that, you can actually embed, like this is, the checkout experience on your own site. If you don't have your own site, you might want to use the full Shopify experience. But Shopify is this sort of turnkey e-commerce platform that you don't need any code. You just kind of like follow the steps. You tell it how you want, upload your images, your product descriptions, all those kinds of things, your pricing, your shipping tables. And then the secret sauce here is that there is a free Shopify app that is made by Lulu that you install in Shopify. And that's where you actually upload your print files, your cover and your pages and things like that. And that seamlessly and automatically makes it so that every time somebody orders, it automatically sends that order over to Lulu. And then it also handles the reverse, which is when that book actually ships, it automatically tells Shopify, hey, here the book is shipped, here's the tracking code. It sends that information back to Shopify, and Shopify automatically sends out those shipping confirmation emails. All that happens automatically, and again, basically for free. The costs are the price per book on the Lulu side. There's no extra cost for the Lulu app, and then Shopify is between $9 and $30 a month. Because I've Shopify embedded on our own website, I'm able to use this Shopify Lite for $9 a month. So again, very, very low cost by comparison. And the only cost really above this is when a book is ordered, and then the order cost is covered by the money collected for the sale. Outside of the $9 a month, there's the $29 a month version where it gives you basically a full store and a blog. So if you don't have a website for your book yet, you can actually do all of your book website on Shopify. That way you're not paying for Shopify plus WordPress or something along those lines. You can put all of that under one roof and have the automated connection between Shopify and Lulu. It's been amazing to have that infrastructure basically automated. I don't have to think about anything unless I get a complaint from a customer who says, hey, there's an issue, and the number of those we get are very, very limited. I can just focus on promoting and selling the book, getting in front of more people in my audience, again, doing podcast tours and things that have been super successful. But that's kind of where I want to wrap up in terms of the outline that I had planned. But I do want to open up to questions with our time remaining. If you want to drop a question in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and come on and ask that as well, either of those is totally cool by me. And like I said before, it could be a question about something that I did, something that you want me to go deeper on, a choice that we made, or something that I didn't talk about that you wished I had. All fair game. No questions. Shy group. Have I heard of Readsy, another service that puts you in contact freelancers, professional? I feel like I did come across Readsy when I was doing that research. Um, that's kind of the beauty of the world that we're living in right now, is that there are multiple of these sort of like marketplace options. I can't speak to Reedsy specifically, and frankly, I can't speak to Lulu's marketplace options either. I can speak broadly to hiring freelancers through this process if that's useful, because I've done that in various projects, including this one. I think one of the most intimidating parts of hiring a freelancer of any kind is feeling like you're putting a bunch of money into something and not knowing how it's going to go, right? And when you're working with a publisher, you kind of get to that it's not your problem, right? I mean, it is your problem, but somebody else is in control of that problem. Sometimes that goes well. Many times authors end up in situations where like, well, that's not what I wanted to happen, but the publisher made a decision for me. So the concrete example I can give is the designer that I hired for the book. We had actually worked together on a much smaller project. So when I'm hiring any kind of freelancer, what I try to do is find one small version of the bigger project that I can get them to do, pay them their market rate for it, and kind of want to get a working sample. I believe completely in paying people for their skill and expertise. I don't want people doing spec work for me, but I will often so in the case of the book, I might say, here is one page of the manuscript. Can you do a basic page layout with my constraints? Or if I'm doing editing, it could be the same thing. Here's one page, like, or one chapter, something along those lines. Smaller project, smaller investment, less risk for you and for them. And it also, what I've learned is, so long as you're paying people for their work, it also puts the ball in their court to do a really good job to earn the rest of the project, right? Versus feeling like I've got to convince you to put all of your eggs in this basket. So sometimes that takes, you thinking about your creative work in some of its smaller pieces, or what are the steps. If it's your first time going through it, sometimes that can be a little bit challenging, but I try to think about what is the smallest self-contained step that I can get that person to demonstrate their work, so that I can feel confident that I'm going to get what I want, so I can learn what their communication style is too. I find that far more often the issues that I run into aren't really that they can't do the work that I need them to, whether it's creative work like design or editors, or business work like agenting or sales, things like that. The most common mistakes, or not mistakes, but challenges, are actually more like communication, either poor communication, miscommunication, no communication. Getting ghosted by freelancers is, I almost want to say, it's part of the game. So if it happens to you, don't feel like you did something wrong. But like, walk away and find a new freelancer. There's lots of very good freelancers, but you're very likely to bump into somebody ghosting you from time to time. Hopefully less often than you have good experiences. But I think it's a really good opportunity to try out the working relationship in a small trial project. I even just did this recently with a very small animation, where I knew that there was multiple steps to the animation, but I picked just like one element of it, and I was like, just do that one element. I kind of want to see how you approach that, and if it looks good, we'll green light the rest of it. Um, they know they're getting paid regardless for that one small thing. If it's good, we can move forward. If it's not good, I don't have to feel like I have to create an out. I can just say, not quite what I was looking for. Thanks for your effort. Pay you for that, and we can move on to the races. I would also say, if you're using any platforms that have like reviews, or I would say like stay away from marketplaces that don't have reviews. Most of them do at this point. But actually, like, go through and read the reviews, and not just like the first few. Go through and read a bunch. Um, those reviews are a great way to not just give yourself confidence that that person is legitimate and not like a scammer or something like that. It also gives you a sense of what their other clients value the most out of their work, and can give you a good idea of what to expect. But good question. I'll take a closer look at Readsy actually and see what that looks like, because I think it came up in my searches, but I can't remember. Any other questions from the group? And I'm an open book, so to speak. I will say that this experience of self-publishing this was a ton of fun. And like I said, it's been profitable. We're coming up on 4,000 copies, I want to say. So the book is grossed, I think we're coming up on like 50 grand or something along those lines inside of 7 months. The experience has been good enough that I want to do it again. And I want to do it again in less than a year after I did the first one, which basically every friend I have who has written a book has said the opposite. They write a book and they're like, I'm never doing that again. Sort of like doing a home renovation or having a kid. It's like, you do it once, you're like, okay, we're never doing that again. Then it takes a while for you to like kind of gear up to do it again. I'm super excited to publish again, because I know that the next thing we publish, we get to build on top of all of the lessons that were a little bit harder to learn the first time, or we had to figure everything out the first time. Now we know, what the files need to be like when we upload them to Lulu. So the designer, I'm working with the same designer for our next book, and she knows sort of the ins and outs of how to export the file from InDesign correctly into a PDF file that can be uploaded to Lulu for the best print quality. We've got templates set up for front matter. She actually, when she did the book proposal, she was able to put together a really detailed outline of, here's all the steps that last time we had to figure out from scratch. Now we've just got a checklist. And being able to sort of be our own little publishing house is a pretty exciting outlook. Because each time we do this, we'll get better at all of this extra stuff, that ultimately, with a publisher, you're outsourcing all of that extra stuff for a very large percentage of your sales, and also giving up control. And I think that creative people often are too quick to give up control, sometimes for peace of mind, but often because they think that's their only option. And I hopefully, besides any of the specific actionable takeaways, I hope that maybe this has you consider that maybe holding on to more of your ownership and taking a swing at self-publishing is something that you actually want to do, or that if you've self-published before, but you want to level up in some way, that something here has given you inspiration, ideas, things that you can take to your own work. But if people don't have any other questions, I'm happy to wrap up with a couple of extra minutes before the end of the day. And offer that, if anybody has any questions that you didn't get to ask or something pops into your mind, my inbox is always open, alex@tiny.mba. That email that I mentioned earlier does actually go to a person, goes to me. So questions about the book, questions about self-publishing, any of these tools, how to reach out, build your audience. There's a ton of stuff about those topics on Stacking the Bricks as well. You'll find that a lot of the things are less focused specifically on publishing, but it is very much on creating things and selling those things. So if that's a thing that you want to explore more of, check out Stacking the Bricks, and feel free to reach out anytime. And I hope everybody stays safe, and maybe we get to do a Blue Stoop hangout in person before the end of 2021.
Yeah, one day. Thank you so much, Alex, for sharing all of your expertise. and just your experience with us. I know that a lot of people really have benefited from today.
Great. I'm glad. Thank you for having me.